Marcus Bennett sat in his corner office on the 50th floor of Bennett Tower, looking out at the city skyline he helped shape over the past 20 years. The morning sun reflected off the glass buildings, creating a golden glow that reminded him of his humble beginnings. At 45, he had become not just successful, but a legend in the business world. His assistant, Linda, walked in with her usual tablet in hand, ready for their morning briefing. But today was different. Among the stack of papers requiring his attention was a cream-colored envelope that caught his eye. "It's from Sarah Chen in marketing," Linda explained, noticing his curious expression. "She's getting married next weekend." Marcus picked up the invitation, remembering the young executive who had impressed him during several company presentations. Sarah had joined Bennett Enterprises 3 years ago and had quickly risen through the ranks. Her innovative marketing strategies had helped the company secure several major contracts. "She personally dropped it off?" Marcus asked, running his fingers over the embossed letters. Linda nodded. "She was very nervous about it. Said she didn't expect you to come but would be honored if you could." Marcus opened his calendar app, looking at next Saturday's schedule. He had a golf meeting with potential investors in the morning and a charity gala in the evening. With some adjustments, he could make it to the wedding reception in between. "Clear my evening schedule," he told Linda. "Move the gala appearance to next week." Linda raised her eyebrows in surprise but quickly typed the changes into her tablet. It wasn't often that Marcus rearranged his carefully planned schedule for personal events. As Marcus read through the invitation details, he remembered his first meeting with Sarah. It was during a company-wide presentation where she, just a junior marketer then, had boldly challenged his approach to digital advertising. Instead of being offended, he had been impressed by her courage and insights. Since then, he had watched her career with interest, mentoring her occasionally. The wedding was to be held at the Grand Plaza Hotel, one of the city's most prestigious venues. Marcus knew the owner well. They had made several business deals over drinks at the hotel's rooftop bar. He picked up his phone and made a quick call. "James, it's Marcus Bennett. Listen, one of my executives is having her wedding at your hotel next weekend. I want you to upgrade everything: flowers, wine, catering. Send the extra bill to me, but keep it quiet." Later that afternoon, Marcus called his personal stylist. "I need a new suit for a wedding," he said. "Something appropriate but not too flashy. We don't want to overshadow the bride and groom." His driver, George, who had been with him for 15 years, was instructed to have the Rolls-Royce detailed for the occasion. Marcus preferred his Tesla for daily use, but some occasions called for extra sophistication. As the week progressed, Marcus found himself looking forward to the wedding more than he expected. Perhaps it was because he rarely attended social events that weren't business-related. His life had become a series of meetings, deals, and charity appearances. A wedding would be a nice change of pace. The day before the wedding, Marcus received a text from Sarah. "Mr. Bennett, I just wanted to say thank you again for accepting the invitation. It means so much to me." He smiled as he typed back. "Wouldn't miss it, Sarah. Looking forward to meeting your family." What Marcus didn't know was that his RSVP had caused quite a stir in Sarah's family. Her parents, both successful doctors, were excited about having such a prominent figure at their daughter's wedding. However, her fiancé, Richard, had shown less enthusiasm, making odd comments about keeping things traditional. That Friday evening, as Marcus reviewed the wedding gift he had chosen, a fully paid honeymoon trip to the Maldives, he couldn't have known that tomorrow would become one of the most talked about days in the city's recent history. He was simply looking forward to celebrating one of his promising executive's special day, unaware that his presence would trigger a chain of events that would change multiple lives forever. As the sun set over the city, Marcus Bennett, the man who had built an empire from scratch, who had weathered countless business storms and corporate takeovers, was about to face a different kind of challenge. One that would test not his business acumen, but his dignity and character in ways he never expected. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for a wedding. Marcus Bennett adjusted his Italian silk tie as George pulled the gleaming Rolls-Royce up to the Grand Plaza Hotel's entrance. The doorman's eyes widened in recognition, quickly rushing to open the car door. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett," the doorman said with a respectful bow. Several guests entering the hotel stopped to stare at the luxury vehicle and its famous owner. Marcus stepped out, his tall frame carrying the custom-made charcoal gray suit with natural elegance. He carried a simple white envelope, Inside was a card with details about the honeymoon surprise he had arranged for Sarah and her new husband. The hotel lobby buzzed with activity as wedding guests gathered, many dressed in their finest attire. Marcus noticed how conversations stopped as he walked past, followed by excited whispers. He was used to this reaction. His face regularly appeared in business magazines and local news. At the reception hall entrance, a young woman with a clipboard checked his name. "Mr. Bennett," she exclaimed, her professional demeanor slipping for a moment. We have you seated at table 1 with the family." Marcus smiled warmly. "Thank you," he said, handing her his gift envelope. As he entered the beautifully decorated hall, he immediately noticed the upgrades he had secretly arranged: exotic flower arrangements, premium champagne bottles on every table, and an enhanced gourmet menu being prepared by the kitchen staff. Sarah's parents spotted him first. Dr. Chen practically rushed across the room, his wife following close behind. "Mr. Bennett, what an honor to have you here," Dr. Chen said, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "We've followed your success story for years. You're an inspiration to our community." As Marcus chatted with the Chens, he caught sight of Richard, the groom, standing with his groomsmen near the bar. Richard's expression shifted from confusion to something darker as he watched Marcus talking and laughing with his new in-laws. He whispered something to his best man, who glanced at Marcus and shrugged. A server passed by with champagne, and Marcus graciously accepted a glass. He noticed how the server's hands trembled slightly, probably nervous about serving the city's most prominent businessman. "Excellent service," Marcus said kindly, making the young server beam with pride. More guests arrived, and Marcus found himself engaged in various conversations. A local bank director wanted to discuss a potential partnership. A judge's wife hoped he would consider donating to her children's hospital charity. Marcus handled each interaction with practiced ease, never letting his CEO persona overshadow the fact that this was Sarah's special day. "Is that Marcus Bennett?" He heard people whisper. "The Marcus Bennett? The one who turned down buying Twitter because he said it wasn't challenging enough." Richard's mother approached him next, her face flushed with either excitement or the champagne. "Mr. Bennett, I had no idea you would be here. Richard never mentioned knowing someone so important." She emphasized the last word while throwing a critical glance at her son. "Sarah is one of our most valuable executives," Marcus replied diplomatically. "She has a bright future at Bennett Enterprises." The wedding photographer circled the room, capturing candid shots. When she asked to take Marcus's photo with the Chen family, Richard finally approached the group. His handshake was slightly too firm, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "So, you work with Sarah?" Richard asked, his tone suggesting he found it hard to believe. Before Marcus could respond, the wedding coordinator announced it was time to be seated for the ceremony. Marcus noticed his place card at the family table had been written in elegant gold calligraphy. As he sat down, he couldn't help but notice Richard's continuing stares from the front of the room. The other guests at his table were clearly thrilled to be seated with him. A grandmother kept trying to tell them about her grandson's startup idea, while a cousin repeatedly mentioned his investment portfolio. Marcus handled it all with grace, but his attention was drawn to the increasing number of whispered conversations between Richard and his groomsmen, accompanied by not-so-subtle glances in his direction. The wedding was about to begin, and the atmosphere was charged with an unusual tension. Marcus had attended hundreds of high-stakes business meetings, but something about Richard's behavior suggested that this wedding might prove to be one of his more challenging social engagements. Little did he know, the real drama was yet to unfold. The wedding ceremony concluded with Sarah looking radiant in her white gown, though Richard's smile seemed forced as they walked back down the aisle. As guests moved to the reception area, Marcus noticed the increasing frequency of Richard's suspicious glances in his direction. During the cocktail hour, Marcus stood near a window, engaging in conversation with a retired judge about the city's development plans. He could hear snippets of Richard's conversation with his groomsmen at the nearby bar. "Who does he think he is?" Richard muttered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Showing up in that fancy suit, trying to overshadow everyone." His words were slightly slurred, suggesting he had already had several drinks. Sarah's father approached Marcus, clearly trying to draw attention away from his new son-in-law's behavior. "Mr. Bennett, I hope you're enjoying yourself. The ceremony was beautiful, wasn't it?" "Indeed it was," Marcus replied graciously, pretending not to notice when Richard knocked back another drink. Sarah makes a stunning bride. More guests gathered around Marcus, drawn by his warm personality and interesting conversation. He shared stories about his early business days, carefully choosing ones that wouldn't overshadow the wedding celebration. A group of young professionals hung on his every word as he described his first successful deal. "I started with just one small electronics store," Marcus explained. "The key is to never let anyone tell you what you can't achieve." Richard's voice cut through the conversation. "Hey, this is supposed to be my wedding, not some business seminar." He stumbled slightly as he approached Marcus's group, his face flushed from alcohol. Sarah quickly appeared at her new husband's side, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Richard, honey, they're about to serve dinner. We should head to our table." The concern in her eyes was obvious as she tried to guide him away. Marcus smoothly excused himself from the group and headed to his assigned table. You could feel Richard's eyes following him across the room. The other guests at his table shifted uncomfortably, aware of the growing tension. "Can you believe they seated him with the family?" Richard's voice carried across the room as he spoke to his best man. "I mean, who verified if he's even really who he says he is." Sarah's mother looked mortified. She leaned over to Marcus and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Bennett. Richard's not usually like this. He's just nervous about having such an important guest." Marcus gave her a reassuring smile. "Please, don't worry. It's perfectly understandable to be stressed on such a big day." The wedding coordinator announced the first dance, and everyone watched as Sarah and Richard took to the dance floor. Sarah tried to maintain a happy expression, but her eyes kept darting nervously between her new husband and Marcus's table. Richard barely looked at her, his attention fixed on Marcus with an increasingly hostile expression. As dinner was served, Marcus noticed several of Richard's friends huddled together, throwing suspicious looks his way. They whispered among themselves, occasionally snickering. One of them took out his phone and appeared to be taking photos of Marcus. Sarah's young cousin, seated next to Marcus, seemed oblivious to the tension. She chatted happily about her college plans, and Marcus listened attentively, offering kind advice about business school applications. This only seemed to agitate Richard further. "Look at him, acting like he owns the place," Richard said loudly to no one in particular, standing unsteadily by the head table. "Just because he's, trying to act all important." The racial undertones in Richard's comments were becoming more obvious, making several guests visibly uncomfortable. The wedding photographer had stopped taking pictures, unsure how to handle the situation. The band played on, but the music seemed to highlight rather than hide the awkward atmosphere. Marcus maintained his composure, decades of handling difficult business negotiations serving him well. He continued his conversation with Sarah's cousin as if nothing was amiss, though he noticed the security guards by the door speaking into their earpieces and watching Richard closely. The evening was balanced on a knife's edge. The beautiful wedding was being overshadowed by Richard's increasingly erratic behavior, and the other guests could sense that something was about to break. No one could have predicted just how dramatically the situation would escalate in the next few minutes. The wedding reception was in full swing when Tom, Richard's best man, suddenly jumped up from his seat, his face pale with panic. He rushed to Richard, whispering something urgently in his ear. The music continued to play, but the worried expressions on both men's faces caught the attention of nearby guests. "What do you mean it's going?" Richard's voice boomed across the reception hall, causing the band to miss a beat. His words slurred together as he grabbed Tom's shoulder. "Where did you last see it?" Marcus watched the scene unfold while politely declining a fourth attempt by Sarah's aunt to set him up with her daughter. The wedding coordinator hurried over to Richard, trying to keep her voice low as she asked what was wrong. "The Rolex," Richard announced, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Tom's wedding gift to me, a $40,000 Rolex watch, is missing." His eyes darted around the room, eventually fixing on Marcus with unconcealed suspicion. Sarah rushed to her husband's side, her white dress rustling as she moved. "Richard, please lower your voice. We'll find it. Where did Tom last have it?" Tom ran his hands through his hair nervously. "I had it right here on the gift table. I showed it to you just after the ceremony, remember? The blue box with the gold ribbon." The wedding coordinator tried to take control of the situation. "Let's all stay calm. I'll have my staff search the area thoroughly. Perhaps it just got mixed in with the other gifts." But Richard wasn't listening. His face had turned an alarming shade of red as he stared at Marcus, who was now helping an elderly guest to her seat. "Isn't it convenient," Richard said loudly, "that the watch goes missing right after some people who don't belong here showed up?" A horrified gasp went through the room. Sarah's mother covered her face with her hands, while her father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The band stopped playing entirely, leaving an uncomfortable silence broken only by the clinking of glasses and nervous whispers. "Richard," Sarah hissed, grabbing his arm. "Stop it right now. Mr. Bennett is a respected guest and my boss." But the alcohol and prejudice had taken full control of Richard's tongue. "Oh, come on. A black guy shows up in expensive clothes, and suddenly a $40,000 watch disappears? Are we all supposed to just ignore that?" The silence in the room became deafening. Several guests stood up and began gathering their things, unwilling to witness what was unfolding. The wedding coordinator was rapidly typing on her phone, likely calling for backup. Marcus remained seated, his face a mask of calm dignity. He took a slow sip of water and dabbed his mouth with his napkin, decades of dealing with prejudice evident in his composed demeanor. Several guests who recognized him as the city's business legend were shaking their heads in disbelief at Richard's behavior. "I swear I left it right here," Tom muttered, shifting wrapped boxes around on the gift table. His earlier confidence about Richard's accusations seemed to waver as he searched through the presents. Sarah's father finally found his voice. "Richard, you need to stop this right now. You have no idea who you're talking about." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," Richard interrupted, stumbling slightly as he moved away from the gift table. "I'm talking about how I didn't want any of them at my wedding in the first place, but Sarah insisted because of work politics." The hotel's security team appeared at the entrance, speaking quietly into their radio devices. Sarah's makeup was starting to run as tears formed in her eyes. Her perfect wedding day was crumbling around her. Marcus slowly stood up, his 6'2" frame commanding immediate attention. The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. Everyone waited to see how the city's most powerful businessman would respond to such a blatant display of racism. But before Marcus could speak, a child's voice pierced the tension. "Mommy, why is this blue box under the table? It has a pretty gold ribbon." Everyone turned to see a little girl in a pink flower girl dress pointing under the gift table. Tom rushed over and reached beneath the tablecloth, but Richard was too far gone in his prejudiced rage to notice. "I want him searched," Richard shouted, pointing an unsteady finger at Marcus. "Empty your pockets right now." His face was crimson, veins bulging in his neck as he took aggressive steps toward Marcus. The security guards moved forward, but not toward Marcus. Their attention was focused on Richard, whose behavior had become increasingly threatening. Sarah grabbed her husband's arm, trying to pull him back. "Richard, stop. The watch is right here," Tom called out, holding up the blue box with the gold ribbon. "It just fell under the table. Nobody stole anything." But Richard wasn't listening. He shrugged off Sarah's grip and continued his advance toward Marcus. "I bet you thought you were so clever, didn't you? Coming here in your fancy suit and expensive car, trying to fool everyone." Marcus stood his ground, his expression calm but firm. The room watched in tense silence as Richard stopped just a few feet from him, swaying slightly from the alcohol. "Young man," Marcus said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room, "I understand this is your wedding day, and you're under a lot of stress, but I suggest you think very carefully about your next words." "Or what?" Richard sneered, his words slurring. "You'll call your lawyer? I bet you don't even have one. I bet that suit isn't even yours. Probably borrowed it to crash my wedding." Sarah's father stepped between them. "Richard, that's enough. Do you have any idea who this man is?" "Oh, I know exactly what he is," Richard spat out, using a racial slur that made several guests gasp in horror. Sarah burst into tears, and her mother rushed to comfort her. Marcus adjusted his custom-made suit jacket with deliberate calmness. "I built my empire dealing with people far more intimidating than you, Mr. Williams. People who actually had power to back up their threats, unlike a mid-level sales representative at Henderson Solutions." Richard's face flickered with confusion. "How do you know where I work?" "I know because Henderson Solutions has been trying to secure a contract with Bennett Enterprises for the past 6 months," Marcus replied, his voice level but authoritative. A contract I was considering signing next week. Was considering, that is. The color drained from Richard's face as realization began to dawn. Sarah's father seized the moment to speak up. Richard, you're making a fool of yourself in front of Marcus Bennett, the CEO of Bennett Enterprises and the largest business owner in the city. The man who donated the entire cancer wing at City Hospital. The man whose company employs over 10,000 people in this city alone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as guests pulled out their phones, showing each other news articles and photos of Marcus. Richard stumbled backward, his mouth opening and closing without forming words. I didn't. Richard stuttered, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. No, you didn't think, Marcus said calmly. You saw the color of my skin and made assumptions. Unfortunately for you, those assumptions will have consequences far beyond this room. The security guards moved closer, ready to escort Richard out if necessary. The wedding coordinator was frantically whispering into her phone, while photographers who had captured the entire scene checked their cameras with wide eyes. Sarah approached Marcus, mascara streaking her cheeks. Mr. Bennett, I am so sorry. I had no idea that he would. Marcus turned to her with genuine sympathy. Sarah, you're a brilliant young woman with a promising future. Don't let anyone diminish your light, not even your husband. He paused, choosing his next words carefully, though I suspect that particular situation might resolve itself soon. Richard had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, as the full implications of his actions began to sink in. His best man stood awkwardly nearby, still holding the recovered Rolex, which now seemed insignificant compared to the disaster that had unfolded. The once joyous wedding reception had transformed into a scene that would be talked about in the city's social circles for years to come, and the evening was far from over. The next 30 minutes at the Grand Plaza Hotel's reception hall unfolded like a scene from a dramatic movie. Guests huddled in small groups, phones out, sharing social media posts and news articles about Marcus Bennett. Richard's friends, who had been snickering earlier, now stood in shocked silence, desperately deleting their social media comments from the evening. Did you know he donated $50 million to the Children's Hospital last year? One guest whispered. I heard he turned down buying 3 professional sports teams because he said he'd rather invest in local businesses, another added. Richard remained slumped in his chair, his wedding suit wrinkled and his tie askew. His mother approached him, her face a mix of anger and disappointment. Do you have any idea what you've done? She hissed. Your father and I raised you better than this. Sarah had retreated to a corner with her parents and older sister. Her carefully applied makeup was ruined by tears, but her expression was changing from devastation to anger as she watched her new husband's continued poor behavior. I want an annulment, she said quietly to her father, who nodded in understanding. I can't be married to someone who thinks like that. Meanwhile, Marcus had taken control of the situation with the same calm efficiency he used in corporate boardrooms. He spoke quietly with the hotel manager, ensuring that all guests would have safe transportation home. He also made arrangements to compensate the wedding staff generously for dealing with the uncomfortable situation. The wedding coordinator approached Marcus nervously. Sir, several guests have posted videos of the incident online. They're already going viral. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Contact my office first thing Monday morning. We'll issue a statement that focuses on promoting diversity and education rather than punishment. This should be a learning opportunity. Richard's boss, who had been a wedding guest, was frantically making phone calls in the corner. Everyone could hear snippets of his conversation. Yes, sir, I understand the contract's importance. No, sir, I had no idea he held these views. Yes, sir, I'll handle it first thing tomorrow morning. Sarah's cousin, a journalism student, had captured the entire confrontation on her phone. She approached Marcus with professional courtesy. Mr. Bennett, would you like me to delete the footage? I understand if you want to keep this private. Marcus smiled kindly at her. No, keep it. Sometimes people need to see these incidents to understand that prejudice isn't just a concept in history books. It's still very real, even at what should be joyous occasions. The hotel's security team had positioned themselves near Richard, who was now attempting to stand on shaky legs. I need to explain, he slurred, trying to move toward Marcus. I think you've explained quite enough, Sarah's father intercepted him. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further. Tom, still holding the recovered Rolex, tried to approach Marcus. Sir, I want to apologize. I should have checked under the table before. I never meant to. Marcus raised a hand to stop him. You were caught up in your friend's prejudice. That's a choice you made. Remember how it feels right now, watching your friend destroy his life because of bigotry. Let it be a lesson. Sarah finally gathered her courage and walked up to Marcus, her head held high despite her tears. Mr. Bennett, about my position at the company. Take 2 weeks of paid leave, Marcus interrupted gently. Handle your personal matters, then come back ready to continue your excellent work. Your professional life shouldn't suffer because of someone else's prejudice. The room had mostly emptied by now, leaving only the key players in the evening's drama. The beautiful wedding cake remained uncut, the champagne towers untouched. Wedding favors sat forgotten on the tables as the staff began quietly cleaning up around the remaining guests. Richard's father finally appeared, having spent the last 20 minutes talking to their family lawyer. His face was grim as he approached his son, knowing that the consequences of this evening would extend far beyond a ruined wedding reception. By Sunday morning, the incident at the Grand Plaza Hotel had become the city's biggest trending topic. Video clips of Richard's racist outburst and the revelation of Marcus Bennett's identity had spread across every social media platform. Local news stations ran the story as their headline, with reporters gathered outside the hotel seeking comments from staff and guests. Marcus sat in his home office, watching the media coverage while his PR team worked on damage control. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages of support from business leaders, community activists, and politicians. But his mind was on Sarah, the talented young executive whose wedding had turned into a public spectacle. Sir, his assistant Linda called from the doorway. Sarah Chen is here to see you. Sarah walked in, looking exhausted but determined. She had changed from her wedding dress into simple business attire, as if trying to distance herself from yesterday's events. The annulment papers are being prepared, she said without preamble, sinking into the chair across from Marcus. I spent the night at my parents' house. I just couldn't look at him. Marcus nodded sympathetically. You're making a brave decision, Sarah. It's not easy to walk away, but sometimes it's necessary. The media won't leave my family alone, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. They're camping outside my parents' house. Richard's racist rant is all over the internet. My mother is worried it will affect her medical practice. I've already contacted the top PR firm in the city, Marcus assured her. They'll help your family navigate this situation. All expenses paid, of course. Meanwhile, across town, Richard was facing his own crisis. His employer, Henderson Solutions, had called an emergency board meeting. The company's largest potential client, Bennett Enterprises, had been publicly insulted by their employee, and damage control was their top priority. Richard sat in the conference room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, as the CEO delivered the news. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Your actions have cost this company millions in potential contracts. We're lucky if Mr. Bennett doesn't sue us for discrimination. Outside the building, protesters had gathered, holding signs condemning racism and demanding accountability. Local civil rights organizations had called for a boycott of Henderson Solutions unless they took decisive action against Richard. Back at Bennett Enterprises, Marcus was turning the incident into an opportunity for positive change. He called an emergency meeting with his executive team, including video calls with leaders from all their global offices. We're launching a new initiative, he announced. The Bennett Inclusion Program. $5 million in initial funding for education and training programs to combat workplace discrimination. I want this incident to spark real change. Sarah watched the meeting from her seat near the door, amazed at how Marcus was transforming her personal tragedy into a force for good. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard, his 10th attempt to apologize, but she deleted it without reading. The city's social circles were abuzz with the story. Richard's country club membership was revoked. Friends distanced themselves, removing photos with him from their social media accounts. His best man Tom issued a public apology for his role in the false accusation, announcing he would be attending sensitivity training. By Sunday evening, Marcus sat down for an exclusive interview with the city's most respected news anchor. The interviewer asked why he had maintained such composure during Richard's racist attack. Throughout my career, I've faced prejudice in many forms, Marcus explained thoughtfully. Some people see my skin color before they see my achievements. But I've learned that the best response to ignorance is not anger, but excellence. Success is the best revenge, but education is the best solution. The interview was interrupted by breaking news. Richard's father's law firm had asked him to withdraw his partnership application, citing the reputational damage his actions had caused. His entire future, carefully planned and privileged, was unraveling thread by thread. Sarah watched the interview from her parents' living room, finally feeling a sense of peace about her decision. Her mother squeezed her hand supportively as Marcus continued to speak about turning this ugly incident into a catalyst for positive change. 1 month after the wedding incident, the city had changed in subtle but significant ways. The video of Richard's racist outburst, which had gone viral internationally, became a case study in business schools about how quickly privilege and career prospects could crumble in the face of exposed prejudice. Marcus Bennett sat in his office, reviewing the final plans for the Bennett Inclusion Program. What had started as a $5 million initiative had grown to $20 million after other business leaders in the city pledged their support. The program would provide scholarships, fund diversity training, and create opportunities for minority entrepreneurs. Sarah knocked on his office door, looking refreshed and confident. The past month had transformed her from a promising executive into a powerful voice for change within the company. Her annulment had been finalized in record time, with Richard offering no contest. The first training session starts next week, she reported, placing a folder on Marcus's desk. We have CEOs from 30 major companies signed up to attend. They'd all want to prevent what happened at my wedding from happening in their organizations. Marcus nodded approvingly. And how are you doing? Really? Sarah smiled, her first genuine smile since that fateful day. Better. The media finally left my parents alone after your interview went viral. Mom's medical practice actually has more patients now, people who want to support our family after what happened. Meanwhile, across town, Richard's life had become a cautionary tale. Henderson Solutions had not only fired him, but had also made their anti-discrimination training mandatory for all employees. His attempt to find new employment had been unsuccessful. The video of his behavior followed him everywhere. Richard's father had retired early from his law firm, unable to bear the shame his son had brought upon their family name. The country club membership Richard had prized so much was permanently revoked, and his social circle had shrunk to almost nothing. His best man Tom no longer returned his calls. The Rolex watch that had sparked the confrontation sat untouched in its blue box, a permanent reminder of how quickly life could change. Richard had tried to sell it to pay his mounting legal fees, but no local jeweler would do business with him. Back at Bennett Enterprises, Marcus had turned the incident into a movement. Companies across the city were examining their hiring practices and workplace cultures. The Bennett Inclusion Program had become a model for corporate responsibility, with organizations nationwide requesting to implement similar initiatives. Sir, Linda interrupted, entering the office. The mayor is here to discuss the citywide implementation of the inclusion program. As Marcus stood to greet the mayor, he glanced at the framed newspaper article on his wall. The headline read, "Local CEO turns wedding disaster into triumph for diversity." The article had become required reading in corporate training sessions across the country. Sarah excused herself from the meeting, heading to her newly promoted position as Director of Corporate Social Responsibility. Her experience had given her unique insights into the importance of workplace diversity and inclusion. That evening, Marcus attended a charity gala, the same one he had skipped to attend Sarah's wedding. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he delivered the keynote speech, he reflected on how a single evening had created ripples of change throughout the business community. Sometimes, he told the audience, the worst moments in life become catalysts for the best changes. What matters is not that prejudice exists, but how we respond to it when we encounter it. In the audience, Sarah sat with her parents, her engagement ring long returned to Richard. She had declined his numerous attempts to apologize, choosing instead to focus on her career and the positive changes she could make in the world. The final news story about the incident aired that night. It showed Richard leaving the city, having accepted a low-level position in a small town thousands of miles away. His departure marked the end of one story and the beginning of another, a story about how one man's prejudice had inadvertently launched a movement for positive change. Marcus watched the news report from his office, then turned to the stack of applications on his desk. They were from minority entrepreneurs seeking funding from the Bennett Inclusion Program. He smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge wasn't just success, it was creating opportunities for others to succeed too.